When it comes to directing over-the-top, adrenaline-pumping, that's completely illogical, but oh my god, that's the most amazing thing I've ever seen action anime, there's no better man for the job than Tetsuro Araki. He's the man that directed Attack on Titan, Guilty Crown, High School of the Dead, Death Note, the lesser-known Kurozuka, and the topic of this review, Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress. While I can't say that the writing in most of his shows is all that stellar, with the exception of maybe Death Note, there's a special place for these shows in the anime community because most of them are fantastic gateway anime for Western audiences. It's hard to find someone in the anime community who hasn't seen or at least heard of a show he's directed because of how famous these shows are. When it was announced last year that he's directing a new anime with the same staff as Attack on Titan, it seemed as though people got pretty excited. I was fairly skeptical myself because I didn't really want another Attack on Titan clone, and Wit Studio drove itself into a ditch in 2015. Seraph of the End proved that Wit Studio can take a decent manga and screw it up by completely changing the tone and overall feeling, and Rolling Girls went from being pretty fun to really boring, though still well animated. Though when I heard it was airing on the Noitamina block, and that it was a completely original work, my interest began to peak. I did not watch it while it was airing because I decided to wait for it to finish, but now that I've watched it all in full, I have to say that Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress is my favorite anime from Tetsuro Araki. While Death Note is technically his best work, Kabaneri managed to display all his talents as an action director while also providing decent characters, an intriguing world, and writing that doesn't make me want to bash my head against the wall. Well, for the most part, but we'll get to Biba later. And I realize that that's kind of a controversial opinion, I suppose. Most people seem to not like this show very much, and I don't really get why. Yeah, the writing in the last half kinda took a turn for the worse, but overall I thought it was a pretty good action anime. So let's get to explaining why. I think the main aspect of Kabaneri that works so well is its intriguing and unique setting. We've seen post-apocalyptic anime before, but I can't say I've ever seen a setting quite like Kabaneri's. It's basically a combination of traditional Japanese culture and the Western industrial evolution in a post-apocalyptic setting. The government operates under a shogun, and the buildings resemble Japanese royal palaces and homes. On the other hand, there's a lot of machinery, especially the huge trains that transport the characters from station to station. The colors also resemble that of the industrial evolution, with the show's more subdued and almost charcoal nature at points. The show's setting is definitely more technologically advanced than its main counterpart, Attack on Titan, which actually significantly changes the plot and characters despite maintaining the same basic fundamentals. For one, I really like how the show makes Ikuma, its main character, a mechanic who's very quick on his feet and intelligent. Well, technically he's just a steam boy who repairs trains in the beginning of the show, but that's not the point. He isn't a whiner like Eren and actually tries to accomplish his goals through science instead of just screaming about killing the Kabane. He takes risks by gathering Kabane hearts for research and builds a piercing gun that can destroy a Kabane's iron heart cage solely through his own scant resources. Now, this isn't to say that he's not outspoken or doesn't shout, but he does speak his mind despite any preceding punishments. For example, in the first episode, the Bishi accuse an arriving man of being a Kabane and attempt to kill him. Ikuma stands up for the man, telling the Bishi that they're not doing their jobs correctly. They are, after all, supposed to hold the accused in prison for 3 days, just in case of errors in identifying the infected. The important aspect to note is that Ikuma is shaking when he first calls out, which his friend Takumi notices. This indicates that Ikuma is fully aware of the consequences of his actions, but stands up for the accused regardless. This is merely the first visual cue we get into Ikuma's bravery, stubborn attitude, and dedication within the show. Unfortunately, the Bishi then shove Ikuma to the ground and he receives a beating. The man, taking the opportunity, then tries to escape, only to get shot once the Bishi notices. As it turns out, Ikuma was right. The man wasn't turning into a Kabane. Despite this, Ikuma is taken to jail where he first talks with Mume. When she asks him if he knew that the man wasn't a Kabane, he admits that he didn't know. He was just standing up for a fellow human being. That's pretty admirable, if not extraordinarily reckless, which is a fairly accurate synopsis of his character, to be perfectly honest. I think what mainly separates Ikuma from other characters of his type, though, is that he shows a wide variety of emotions beyond anger, bravery, and edgy McEdster. He's shown as happy, depressed, completely broken down, a bit of a dork at times, and determined. My favorite scenes with this character are when he interacts with his friend Takumi, because that's when Ikuma's at his most relaxed and cheerful. Heck, my favorite scene in the entire show is when Takumi finds Ikuma in his house in episode 2 when Ikuma proclaims his victory over the success of their invention. The two happily cry out in sync and then exchange a high five with each other. It was absolutely amazing and a nice display of humanity. It's acts like these that make them somewhat relatable, and is a nice break from the endless death and violence within the rest of the show. It doesn't feel too out of place. Speaking of death and violence, that's another aspect of Tetsuro Araki shows that occurs quite frequently. Attack on Titan is practically known for its blood and guts, High School of the Dead is about zombies, which basically entails violence, and Death Note is literally about a guy who writes down to the people he wants dead. In fact, the only show that he directed that seems to not be mature solely for the violent content is Guilty Crown, which is very restrained in comparison to his other shows. Kabaneri can be pretty violent at times, but it never gets to the point where it feels edgy. Yeah, a lot of the action is plain ridiculous, but considering the circumstances these characters are in which the Kabaneri are mindless monsters that need to be killed or seriously maimed in order to be stopped, violence is warranted. In other words, it makes sense within the context of a setting, which helps the show maintain some believability. Though if you started this show expecting realistic violence and action, you should really turn elsewhere. Actually, what the heck are you doing here? Did you not see the promotional image for this show? It does not scream realistic action in any way! Moving on, the next major character of the show is Mume, and I feel very ambivalent about her. For one, I like how she's strong, takes no names, and has an amazing fighting style that's brought to life through incredible animation and choreography. On the other hand, her actual personality is very inconsistent because the creators seem to throw a whole ton of different and conflicting traits into one pot and hope for the best. For one, she's carefree, happy, and doesn't care about what others think, but her backstory and the environment that she developed in with her brother Biba suggests that she should be slightly hardened, indifferent, and distant. Biba teaches her that the weak are cowards, yet she comforts children by making them laugh and willingly protects the other, weaker, less capable passengers on the train. I'm having a hard time imagining that Mume could end up this way. One aspect I do like is her character development. On the train, once everyone begins to trust her, she becomes attached to this group of people and wants to keep them safe. Mume's evolution from an indifferent and carefree person to one that cares about her companions is handled fairly well, despite her initial personality being a bit jumbled. I just wish that there was more time to flesh her character out, because despite being a major character, she doesn't leave much of an impact. Though the main aspect of the show that reveals how Mume doesn't make sense, and is by far the worst part of Kabaneri, is the main villain Biba. His showing up is the equivalent of eating a whole chocolate cake and then finding a cockroach inside it when you're about 3/4 of the way through. Sure, what you were previously doing wasn't exactly healthy or beneficial, but you were at least enjoying yourself until that cockroach soiled the entire experience, and that one cockroach keeps glaring at you while you unwillingly finish the cake, and this metaphor is going too far. So what exactly is wrong with Biba? To put it simply, his backstory and motivation makes absolutely no sense, and his presence within the show is pointless. The Kabaneri pose enough of a threat, so another villain is truly unnecessary. In Attack on Titan, it makes sense to have additional villainous characters because they weren't touted as main characters. They mostly boiled down to greedy merchants or confused politicians, not huge villains with evil plans, and they added to the setting. Biba is a huge villain with an evil plan, and not only is his presence pointless, his plans are just flat out ridiculous. Firstly, he is against cowardice and thinks that the people are hiding inside the walls because they're scared of the Kabaneri. So he wants to set the Kabaneri loose into the walls, especially the main capital where his father lives, so people can live less like cowards. What? With that logic, humanity would regress back into its more nomadic and cultureless phase before it started building strongholds. Or, well, whatever it was before they started building strongholds in this case. We're actually never given a clear explanation about what humanity was like before the Kabaneri. I'm just going to assume that it wasn't that technologically advanced. Anyway, there's a difference between being a coward and living intelligently against an unstoppable threat. If humans didn't build some sort of safe house, then nearly every child would die in a natural death, crippling the population. Also, releasing the Kabaneri onto an unprepared, unexpected population in an enclosed space with no escape or means of fighting is not an accurate way to learn how strong a person is. None of the normal townsfolk within the show are ready to fight, because they didn't expect the Kabaneri to attack, like any normal person would when they're protected from the monsters. Even the most experienced and powerful warriors would die because they're taken off guard. On top of that, his backstory makes no sense because not enough information is presented. It's shown that he had a bad relationship with his father, and that when he was 12, his father sent him and his friends on a suicide mission, and that's about it. Apparently, the suicide mission caused Biba to believe his father was a huge coward, but I don't see how that translates into let's kill all of humanity because people who are smartly avoiding the Kabaneri by living behind walls are cowards. There's no logical connection between Biba pre- and post-character development, which kills all potential believability. Finally, how his backstory ties into Mume's, while not a bad concept, feels badly executed because of Biba's botched backstory. After a man murders Mume's mother, accusing her of being a Kabaneri, Biba somehow shows up and motivates her to kill the man, which she does. He then drills into her that only the strong survive and that her mother died because she was weak. I actually like the concept the show was going for. Biba takes advantage of an emotionally destroyed Mume to bring her over to his side, but the way she acts afterward feels unnatural. I feel like someone with that mindset would be more stoic, but she's shown to be cheerful and innocent. It's never made clear whether this is a coping mechanism, but I think she would act more like a hardened individual than she is portrayed as in the anime. Anyway, I guess I should address another major problem with Kabaneri, and that is the generally messy script, especially after Biba showed up. Prior to his appearance, Kabaneri kept each episode relatively simple. Someone makes a stupid decision, the Kabaneri attack, Ikuma learns something new about the Kabaneri, there's a huge action scene, and people scream a lot. While this isn't a particularly unique setup, it really works in the show's favor, because the action in the show is some of the best since One Punch Man aired in the fall. The train offers a fantastic claustrophobic atmosphere that lends itself to many tense moments, the choreography is amazing and always fun to look at, and the music by Hiroyuki Sawano always makes any transpiring event feel epic and huge. Though these episodes' main strength is the fact that they weren't complicated. While complicated action entertainment can work, such as the Jason Bourne movies, it is extraordinarily hard to pull off. If the audience is too preoccupied with the complex plot, it can ruin the base enjoyment of an action scene. However, there is a difference between a complicated action scene and an action scene occurring within a complicated story. Let's take Neon Genesis Evangelion, which has an infamously complex story. Something worthy of note is that the scenarios of the action scenes with Eva aren't normally too hard to grasp. In the end of Evangelion, Asuka is fighting the other Evas to protect her life and regain a sense of purpose again. The scene works so well because all of her characterization and the reasoning for why she's doing this are established beforehand, and the actual scenario, that being her need to regain her purpose, isn't a difficult concept to understand. It's a simple scene that runs tangent along a whole ton of other complicated concepts. Kabaneri didn't have a complex story initially, relying on only one setup. The Kabaneri are evil and dangerous. It's so simple, but effective, because it essentially makes the entire show an action set piece. Perfect for this type of anime and Tetsuro Araki's general style. Kabaneri starts becoming unentertaining when it tries to be complex and features so many different events all occurring at the same time, because it's hard to focus on any particular element when they all seem to be of equal importance. By the time Biba came around, the only character I remotely cared about was Ikuma. His character is generally isolated from all the complicated stuff surrounding Biba, the politics, and all the additional characters that along with Biba. Now, you might say, oh, I guess you don't have the mental capacity to understand this complex plot, how sad. To that, firstly, rude. Secondly, it's not that at all. Some of my favorite shows are way more complex than Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress, like Kyoso Giga, Fullmetal Alchemist, Origairu, Ping Pong the Animation, and Evangelion. One of my favorite movies of all time is the end of Evangelion, and that's infamous for being almost incomprehensible. What I'm trying to say about Kabaneri is that it shouldn't have gone the complex route, because that's not what it's good at. Kabaneri is good at huge, amazing action set pieces with cool characters fighting zombie-like creatures in creative ways. It's not good when it's also trying to preoccupy you with politics about whether the humans are cowards for living intelligently behind walls, all these experiments regarding the Kabaneri, ideology about survival of the fittest, and too many characters that you're apparently supposed to somewhat care about to keep track of. Since the anime just gets more and more overstuffed, it's hard to focus on the amazing action without getting distracted by everything else, especially because the scenarios become more and more needlessly complicated. The best example of this is probably the final fight. So, Mume is brainwashed by Biba and becomes a Black Storm, which is essentially a giant constructed out of a whole ton of Kabaneri strung together, with a Kabaneri or Kabaneri as the heart. Just ignore the logical fallacies of how that's even possible. To do this, black blood was injected into her, making her more powerful. So for Ikuma to combat this, he has to use the black blood as well, and inject the white blood into Mume to save her, though there's only one vial, so he can't be saved. I'm not even going to question why Ikuma doesn't become a Black Storm as well. Apparently it has to do with the fact that he's male, because I don't even know. But he essentially becomes really overpowered and is somehow also able to utilize a power involving the wind. I mean, that's pretty awesome, and is able to send a train flying, but okay. Anyway, He encouraged Zuko to stop Biba, and Ikuma fights Biba. But while that's going on, you're questioning where Ikuma's new power of airbending came from, and are also forced to keep track of people on the train, and then Ikuma saves Mume, and then somehow they both get cured because Biba somehow injected the white blood into Ikuma, and what the hell am I watching? I get there are many things at stake, but the frenetic editing and refusal to focus on just one set piece makes everything confusing. The logical fallacies also don't help matters, like how, why, and when Biba injected the white blood into Ikuma, and why Ikuma's gender apparently gives him different powers than Mume, and many other plot holes that just spring up in the finale. However, despite all its problems, I think that Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress is worth watching, if not just for those first episodes of action perfection. It's really a mixed bag, to be perfectly honest, but at its high points is incredibly entertaining. I could ramble on about some of its greatest moments, like the brilliantly directed and tension-filled scene in which Ikuma fights a Kabaneri in close quarters and is supposed to turn into a Kabaneri, every single fight on top of the train, the decent character development of Princess Ayame, the wonderful character designs and overall animation, and the fantastic music, but I don't want to repeat myself, and I think I've proved my points well enough. Kabaneri of the Iron Fortress is a fun watch, but you have to have a high tolerance for shoddy writing at points, especially nearing the end. If you want a visual spectacle with fantastic action, though, you are totally in luck, because this is the right anime for you.